everyone, and welcome to WindConductor.org's third session on the future of the wind band. Super excited about our guest tonight. We have returning Bill Perrine, who is the editor, author of the book, The Future of the Wind Band, and from UCLA, Director of Bands, Dr. Travis Cross. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
So, Bill, I wanted to start with you. Over the past 2 weeks, during the first part of before we kind of get into the discussion of the book and everything, we've kind of dug into the structure of the book, how it was created, how it came about, how you were able to get some of these great contributors to be authors of the essays that we read throughout. But one thing that I've been curious about is the way that you structure the book, starting with the topic of relevance and going through each topic and then concluding with democratic citizenship. What was the process that you used for that?
Yeah, so I think the big concept of the book is I got a bunch of topics that I thought would be really interesting and really important. I started looking at, well, how do we organize this, right? Because we have to organize it somehow. They really sort of fell in two sort of big groups. If you think about music as a human practice, there are internal goods to the practice, and then there are external goods. So certain chapters dealt with things that we internally deal with, like in the rehearsal, things like repertoire, things like pedagogy, things like creativity. Those are sort of internal to the rehearsal process. Then there's sort of like the external facing things. Those are things like the ethics, like the economic justice chapter, things like democratic citizenship, which is how bands sort of interact with the broader society outside. Now, there's obviously a lot of conceptual bleed between the topics. Most of the contributors to the volume said, I can't stay in my lane. And I said, that's okay. You don't have to, because I think it's sort of artificial to try and force ourselves to stay in it. But I did sort of want to work my way outward from some of those internal things to the external things. The chapter on relevance, though, I ended up putting at the top, just sort of as I would say as a doorway into the discussion, right? Because pretty much every chapter that followed that has something to do with relevance. I mean, when we talk about relevance as a concept, I mean, that can go in so many different ways. And I tried to leave it as open as possible. But so for me, that was sort of a gateway into all the other topics that came afterwards.
Yeah. And Travis, you actually talked about that in your essay, how the topic of relevance, I mean, and your essay kind of touched on just about every single topic that is covered in the book.
Which I think is okay if you're judging general effect and not an execution caption. It's okay to half your sheet is the same as the other sheet. No, I really did. You know, I think I did put a specific sentence in there saying that I think, you know, I'm certain that things I'm talking about here are going to be themes in the other chapters, because I knew what the other chapters were going to be about. I knew the topics, and you can't really talk about how the experience is relevant to student learning unless you talk about what the rehearsal environment is. Right. And you can't really talk about, you know, whether it's relevant to audiences or even to performers in the ensemble unless you're talking about the repertoire that's being played. So I you know, I don't know when Bill decided how to order things. I don't think they were listed like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but it did seem pretty self-evident that the things that we would be talking about in relevance would have tendrils leading into the rest of the topics.
Sure. And we didn't really get to kind of talk to you before we kind of jumped into the conversation of the book. But Travis, this is your first time coming on Wind Conductor, and I'd love to talk with you a little bit about your journey. So tell us a little bit about your growth from band student, your beginnings in music to being the director of bands at UCLA.
Sure, I'll do it super fast. I grew up in Iowa. Ankeny, Iowa, suburb of Des Moines, had one of the top music programs, band programs, and choral programs in the region, in the area. Suburban upbringing, working class, middle class upbringing. I mean, I think about this a lot, actually. Now I'm going into a whole different tangent, but I think about this a lot relative to the cost of college tuition today, and you know, the financial barriers. You know, I'm the first person in my direct lineage to have a bachelor's degree. So I mean, I don't come from band director parents or professional musician parents, or even kind of white collar professional parents. But I also grew up at a time and in a place where that didn't seem like it was in any way a barrier.
Right.
I think percentile wise, I probably wasn't in the top 50th percentile in terms of resources available, but I was never in a position where I couldn't think that what I wanted to do was something I could do.
Right.
That's a testament to my parents, to my grandparents, the support mechanism that was around, and the time and place in which I grew up. But I was a high school band student, started writing music in middle school. And then so when I got to high school, I was already kind of the kid who was writing some music. And by the time I finished high school, I was already arranging the marching band show for my high school band, which was kind of the competitive leader in the state. Went to St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota for my undergraduate degree, where my band director was Timothy Marr, also a composer, conductor, educator extraordinaire. And then I taught high school band for 4 years in Edina, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. Terrific program, terrific kids, terrific colleagues. I learned so much there, so much support. I was able to go to Minnesota Orchestra, St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, musicals and plays all the time. After 4 years at Edina, and actually that I taught at another big southern program. So my high school band experience is very much suburb of big city. Went to Northwestern for my master's and doctorate. Taught 5 years at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, where we met for the first time. I think the first time in person was at an all-state concert in Hampton Roads somewhere. And then I'm just about to begin, well, in 8 weeks, because we're on the quarter system. First day of classes is 8 weeks today. In 8 weeks, I'll start my 10th year here at UCLA.
Wow, time goes by quick, doesn't it? It doesn't.
It doesn't seem like 10 years to me.
So, one of the things that, and we can talk about this with the group too, but you mentioned the community and the aspect and how in a smaller community, the band program can have a huge influence on the culture, and that can be the musical cultural center, which my daughter is a graduate of Virginia Tech, and looking at Blacksburg, looking at Blacksburg, it is a very, very rural area. I mean, Blacksburg, the town, city, if we can call it that, revolves around Virginia Tech, which is the total antithesis of Los Angeles, right?
Right.
So what was that transition?
No, yeah, and Chicago.
Right.
So, there would be concerts of some of these ensembles in Northwestern, the brass ensemble, even the wind ensemble, that we'd be happy if there were 200 people in the audience. But that's because the audiences for those concerts could choose between that or the Chicago Symphony and the Lyric Opera and Wicked playing downtown. Right. And they're just a big city has so many options. And that's the case here in Los Angeles too. I mean, I think we get decent audiences for our concerts, and we would always like to have more, and we're trying to do better. But when it comes down to it, we are one of many, 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 many fish in a pond. Whereas when you're at a school in a smaller population center, I mean, that new hall at Virginia Tech, which opened right after I left, I was there for all the construction and none of the never got to conduct in it or teach in it. But that hall is the cultural center, for anything between Roanoke and Bristol. It's a big regional center, and they bring in guest artists and guest acts. But the university ensembles form, a high percentage of the cultural life of that community. And so the point I was trying to make when I wrote about it, when I sort of mentioned that concept in the book, is that, to be relevant doesn't have to be winning big awards and getting published and being written up in the New York Times. It doesn't have to be fancy to be relevant. That what happens all across our country in towns and villages and cities large and small, wherever people are, that's the real world too. And whatever people are experiencing,
Right.
that is of value to them. And it's pretty darn likely that in a mid-sized town or a small town, a college band concert, even a high school, middle school band concert might be the one concert that 100, 200, 500 people attend in a 6-month period. So it plays a different role in their cultural life. And I just wanted to be very clear about saying that counts.
Yeah.
That matters. That's important. Just because it isn't Carnegie Hall or Orchestra Hall or Walt Disney Concert Hall doesn't make it any less real in the world.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about this more with the panel, I hope. But I loved that the fact that you brought out that the wind band as a whole, talking about all the levels of wind band, touches the lives of more people than your symphony orchestras in the United States. And because when we look at the students involved, the parents that come out to the events, the teachers, the community members that come and support the different wind bands, it is it really brings to light the relevance of the wind band in our community. And that is a great segue to bring on our guests. So we got a short word from our sponsor, Amano Music, and we'll be right back with our guest panel.
WindConductor.org's Maestro Moments is brought to you tonight through the support of Amano Music. Amano Music is a collective for composers and a resource to band directors. Find the very best in wind band repertoire, from classic marches updated and edited for contemporary wind ensembles to the latest from innovative independent composers like the piece you're listening to right now, Chatterbox by Jason McChristian. You will also find resources for the band classroom, including books on topics important to band directors, as well as methods like mastering the scales to prepare your band to tackle rigorous repertoire. You can find Amano Music by visiting their website at www.amanomusic.com. That's Amano Music with a double A.
All right, and welcome back. We have on the call with us, we've got returning guest and also contributor to the Future of the Wind Band, Dr. Jacob Wallace, and returning panel member Ruth Peterson. And new to the call, who is able to join us by audio only, we have Chris Gray, who is entering into UNCG as a conducting major, orchestral conducting major at UNCG. And Chris, it's good to have you. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself. We've met the other panel members. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know how much you want me to spill, but I guess I could speak on my work history. Well, my education and work history. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm a brass guy, lower brass. I've taught applied brass and was assistant director of bands at Texas Southern University. I got my undergraduate degree from Norfolk State University in music education, and a master's degree in orchestral conducting from Central Michigan, where I was also the grad assistant for the orchestra. Just recently, I just came back from the Madomic Conductors Retreat with Ken Keesler, and preparing for my DMA this fall at UNCG.
Awesome.
So that's me.
Well, I'm glad you're able to join us, and I'm looking forward to getting your perspective as a person who kind of dives into both worlds of the band and strings conducting. So tonight we've got a few different questions, and I am learning from the experience that we had previously. We never were able to go through all the questions, so this week I am just kind of narrowing it down to more general questions that I am hoping can touch on some of the topics in both of the chapters on relevance and pedagogy. Our first question is, how much of our teaching philosophy is based on our personal experiences in a wind band? And second is, how do issues of equity impact the eudaimonia of our students, and eudaimonia being the well-being or the fulfillment of life within our students, and what are ways we can overcome those issues? The wind band engages with more Americans than professional orchestras, which I referenced that in our introduction with Travis. How does this impact the role of the band director in terms of programming, teaching, equity, and diversity within the wind band classroom? What is the biggest threat to participation in band? And what educational techniques develop student independence and musical growth? What constitutes quality for wind band repertoire? And what is the instrumentation of the wind band in the 21st century? So I would love to start with that first question. How much of our teaching philosophy is based on our personal experiences in a wind band classroom? How about Travis? We were talking to you about your influences coming out of Iowa. How much of that early influence in your band room as a high school student has influenced what you are today?
I mean, I think that I think we are in some ways the sum total of our experiences. Um, but hopefully we are reflected through some sort of a lens of some thought and some analysis and some philosophy. So we either copy everything we've seen and done, and that's who we are in some sort of form, or we have imprinted on us everything we've seen in front of us, everything we've experienced, but then we've kind of run it through a processor of, is that consistent with what I believe, with what my values are, with what I want to be, and then we sort of emerge from it. And I think that's the hope. The hope is
Right.
that all of our experiences are part of us. They enrich us. They're like filling the sponge, as someone said once. They're filling the sponge with water, but then as you squeeze it out, what comes out is who we are. Ironically, that's not my saying. That's something that Frank Tikelli said to me when I interviewed him in the year 1999 about musical influences, about the things you hear, the music you hear. You take it all in, you soak it in, and then what comes out is hopefully you. That we're thinking critically, that we are applying what we want to be on top of what we have seen. And then hopefully that pushes us forward. That causes us to grow, that causes the profession to grow and the genre to grow.
Right. So in the essays in the book, David Elliott and Randall Alsop talked about their early experiences and even their early experiences as an educator and kind of shaping a lot of their philosophy. I know from me personally, my experiences as a student really, well, the reason I'm a band director today is because of what happened as a student in high school, and I really haven't talked about this a lot in a public forum, especially in an online situation. But I actually went to three different high schools as a student, and when I tell people that story, a lot of the first question that is asked is, "Were you a military brat?" And I wasn't. I was actually, unfortunately, my father was a great salesman, but he was not a very good businessman, and we wound up losing everything in a business venture. And we went. I saw the gambit of socioeconomic. Come in middle school, we were the country club, typical white family, upper class, middle upper class. I won't say upper class, middle upper class, white family. And then within the course of a few years, uh, you know, we were on food stamps and just completely lost everything. Wound up moving from my first high school to Wilmington, which I had a great experience with band, and I had a phenomenal band director, Levy Gilliard, at Laney High School in Wilmington, North Carolina. Uh, and then in my junior year, I had moved to Fairfax, and middle of my junior year, walked into the band room, and Mary Ulrey was my band director. And both of those people, I can't thank enough for their openness and willingness to accept people into their band program because and I'm also it's interesting to me because as I talk to so many people and see what the profession is like as an adult, as a band director, in both of those instances, Mr. Gilliard was an African American band director, which is not the typical, and then Mary Ulrey is a woman band director, which isn't the stereotypical. And I was blessed to have those experiences that I didn't even realize until I became older that I had these great influences. But both of those people, their openness to accept somebody new into their program, and the band family as a whole being able to accept somebody, had a huge and profound impact on my course in life as a band director and as an educator. So other panelists, I'd love to hear from what your experiences were, how they may have shaped who you are.
Well, speaking to the nature of the question, which is like, hey, how does being a band director, being in the ensemble classroom impact your growth as a teacher? I would say it's probably the most profound of experiences, because it's such a I don't want to use the word volatile, but it's an unpredictable classroom environment in the way that, like, I teach other classes that aren't band, but I know what that class is going to be every year. If I teach a freshman music theory class, every year I get incoming freshmen. I teach the same textbook. I teach the same materials in relatively the same sequence. If I was teaching 10th grade algebra and I saw students coming in every year teaching them algebra, I would approach it the same way and make small modifications along the way to right the ship in order to be most effective for them. When it comes to an ensemble, you have students who have been in that group for multiple years. You have students you've never seen before. You have wide varieties of talent. And every year your curriculum changes because you're approaching different music to teach to those students. So because of the nature of the environment, it forces you to be adaptable. And you can find a ton of lessons in the adaptability that comes from that environmental situation. So I think I've taken the majority of my lessons as a teacher in terms of adapting how I teach from being in an ensemble-based classroom. I think the effect of that can't be overstated.
Yeah, I think our building sort of on what Jake and Travis have already said, our experiences, particularly early in our career, and how those form us. One of the most valuable things for me was being able to make mistakes, and being able to make some pretty brutal mistakes. I always joke, but it's not really a joke. When I started teaching, I was the world's worst general music teacher for my 7th and 8th graders. I feel so sorry for those kids that had me those years in the general music classroom. And as I look back now, and as I talk to like the students that I work with that might be prospective teachers, I can realize my own deficits sort of that I had in certain aspects of my career, and be like, don't be like me, but I think that's important. I think even in an ensemble classroom, that's important to give ourselves the freedom to make mistakes, because if our students can see us make those mistakes in our life and our teaching, and watch us grow and adapt through that process and making mistakes, that gives them the freedom to be like, oh, I can make a mistake too, but I can still move forward and find ways to deal with that.
I think that ties into the reflective nature of teaching and of what we have to do. I was telling some of my student leaders this just the other day, that when I started teaching high school students, when I was in undergrad and I was teaching just front ensemble percussion for marching band, I approached it in a very specific way from that sort of authoritarian standpoint that we've been talking about throughout these conversations. And 1-2 years went by, and the next year came up for the fall, and I contacted the band director. I said, when does camp start? And he said, well, it starts this day, but you're not coming back. And I said, well, why? And he said, the kids are not responding to you. They're not learning. They're not enjoying the activity. This is just not going to work out. And for me, that was because that was just, I thought this was how rehearsals were supposed to run. This is how we get from point A to point B and get to the product. And that moment was a watershed, because it completely changed my approach to everything. And the story is longer from there, but I always go back to that, because I've had kids, especially at the beginning of my career, that's like, why don't you get angry more? Why don't you yell more and have higher demands? And I said, because I'm not having fun when I'm doing that. And I did not go into this profession to not enjoy myself and to not be grateful for the music making. I'm not here to scream at you. If that's what you need, then that's fine, but you're not going to get that from me.
Ruth, I'm curious about your early influences.
Well, like Travis, I grew up in Iowa, but instead of being near a bigger city, I was in a very small town. My graduating class had 54 in it. We have There's one stoplight in the town, so that tells you what it was like. Um, and I was fortunate enough when I started band in fifth grade. I had a great band director, and then when I was ready to start junior high, I had a female band director, and I didn't know any better that was kind of a bizarre thing to get at that point in the early 80s. And she was phenomenal. Um, she ended up taking me and another student up for lessons at Morningside College in Sioux City once a week. And that was not something she had to do, but from there, I started taking lessons with college students and became a part of the youth orchestra, and would go to the band camp at Morningside College. And I look back now, and I kept a lot of the things I had gotten from her. And I feel very lucky that I got that experience when I did, because I just thought it was normal. And then in the 8th grade, it hit me like a ton of bricks that, oh, I could do this for my career. I would love to do this. And it was because of her and her incredible influence on me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Chris, how about you?
My early influences and how they play into who I am now. I guess for me, my situation may have been a little different. I was adopted, and so band uh, became a representation of family for me earlier on, and I got to meet a lot of cool people, and they, would I would hang out with them and hang out with their families and have dinner with them and all of these kind of family things. So that initially attracted me to it, to the culture itself. Um, and then I guess as time went on in my high school years, I seen a lot of people before me were getting pretty big scholarships to pay for school and to go to school, and especially at the HBCU level. So that pulled me in, and I got a chance, like Mr. Cross, Professor Cross, to do some early arranging and shows, and was really a big part of what we were doing at that time. So that went on and carried on to when I went to my university, my undergraduate university, and I found myself in front of some of the bigger ensembles quite often. And eventually, became something I realized, I had a gift for, and I could probably make a future for myself off of. But it all started, with that family kind of environment, and teaching me, discipline and things that I didn't play sports or anything coming up, so I didn't have another area of my life to kind of learn some of these things. But the structure and discipline, all of and working hard and actually seeing it, pay off, and you getting better on your instrument or your solo or doing better at a festival or whatnot. All of those things, I look back on as I teach applied lessons, as I when I get in front of ensembles and have to prepare material, whatever the case may be, and lead them. I look back on those experiences, and I see some of those kids, that are me, and so that kind of motivates me, and and I draw from those experiences quite a bit.
Yeah. So Travis, in listening to the different stories of the panel here and the experiences that brought us to where we are, there's a wide range, and there's a couple of topics that in your essay you talk about, and something that has come up throughout the book is the idea of the community and the relevance within the local region or the local area, but also the balance of the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, because I don't think anybody on here said it was because we won that big trophy that I chose this as a life that I want to have moving forward and everything. I didn't hear anybody mention that at all. So, and I'll let you kind of go in the direction that you want to go, but how did some of those concepts kind of come about within in regards to the relevance of the band program in the 21st century?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a crack at that. I mean, first, let me just observe. As you said, Aaron. I mean, there's each one of us has a different story, and they're not all that similar. It's kind of the wide range, and it's wonderful that our profession has so many pathways in. I do suspect if someone to undertake a study, longitudinal study of band directors in America, I think you'd find that a majority of people who are band directors come from really good band programs.
Yeah, most definitely.
Now, if it's a big program, a small program, be that as it may. But I do think it's easier or more likely, more common, for someone to come out of a big program than when they're the only one or they don't have access to the kinds of enrichment opportunities. So I think that would be worth kind of studying and trying to better understand for the simple purpose that we want to make it possible for kids from any program to have this as a career path. That's one of the ways we maintain our relevance, is it's not just people come from these certain cloistered programs who are able to do this.
Right.
But to the next point, I mean, I was, as I was trying to think about how to sort of structure my thoughts, I really did want to, I think I broke it down into three general kind of categories. The people, the professional training, which people receive, which is real and true and a legitimate part of what we do. Sort of the avocational, non-professional training that the majority of people in our programs take with them. And then sort of what it means for the audiences and the family members and the listeners. And as I found myself thinking a lot about those intrinsic values and skills when we think about the people who don't major in music, the people who go on to be doctors and lawyers and computer repair technicians and stay-at-home moms and dads and whatever, that our value, the value of our programs, has to provide a professional path, whether it's for band directors or the principal trumpet of the whatever philharmonic or a composer of X. There has to be enough there that gives someone who wants to do it for a living a taste, and then some requisite skills to be able to do that. But we also, I think, all recognize that the majority, even at the college level, the majority of students in our programs end up not doing that for a living. So it's not just okay, but I think important for us to talk about the non-musical skills that we leave our students with as well. Final thought about this is I do think it's a little dangerous to talk about the non-musical at the exclusion of the musical.
Right.
Look what happens to their SAT scores. Look what happens to their income over time or whatever. I mean, that's great. And as I've said, if that gets the program saved, I will be there at the school board meeting with a sign, supporting that. But I think we also need to talk about what does it mean to make music? What does it mean to have a part of your day dedicated to creating beauty with others, which is what happens in the ensemble, to adjusting, to listening, to compromising, to working together to create beauty, to expressing something within ourselves. And in an ensemble, what makes it difficult is to express something within ourselves and bring that together with everyone else in the room. So I think that those sort of intrinsic rewards and experiences, which are not totally separate from extrinsic recognition. I don't think there's no dichotomy between have a band that plays really in tune and gets Division I ratings and wins trophies, and have a band that has good positive learning experiences. I think they're actually often one and the same. But I think especially as we think about the non-professional professional musicians who come out of our programs, which is most of them, those intrinsic life, art, soul values are really important for us to talk about.
Most definitely. So I guess that kind of touches on a topic that we were discussing in the previous episode. What is the focus of the band? What is the goal of the band director in education? What is our, if I were to say that my goal is to create kids to go and become professional musicians, I would have, that's impossible for us to make that. So what is our goal as a band director?
If I could sort of jumpstart, and then I kind of want to shoot it over to Bill, because one of the things that I've noticed sort of permeating all the different essays is that one of the true gifts of not just the wind band, but the large ensemble setting is the focus on listening and helping students understand that they have to listen at various stages and various levels. They have to listen to themselves. They have to listen to their section. They have to listen to the ensemble, and that listening louder than you play and being hyper aware of everyone's role in the activity is what leads you to not only aesthetic success, but meaningful music making experiences, because that's how you can really be engaged with your peers. And that concept of listening is something that is just spills over regardless of the occupation in which you're in. It's especially relevant today. Because I wanted to mention it last week, but I don't remember whose essay it was, but they equated that like a fugue, right? That every voice in our lives and in our politics and whatever interactions we have needs to be heard, right? Like it's a demand that you have to hear everyone's voice and everyone's opinion to really get the full meaning behind whatever you're engaging with. Bill, I don't know if that was a real subtle lead you buried for every author. It seemed like it was just the connective tissue between everything.
Yeah, I think it just emerged. I don't think there was any intentionality there. It's nice, like when there's synergy, like particularly like with Travis and David's essays, how they sort of work together and built around a similar idea from two different sides. I love the focus on intrinsic value, the intrinsic value of the musical experience, how that cuts across divisions. I mean, that's something I'm very, very passionate about myself, is how music can bring us together, and how music can help us to relate to each other as human beings before a lot of the other stuff that we throw in to divide us. I would say, like, from the philosophical standpoint, stepping in, putting my philosopher hat on for a moment, I think a lot of the criticisms of the wind band has been maybe because there have been times as a profession where our actions have not matched our rhetoric. So just to give a couple of examples, we mentioned the hyper-competitive thing. And I think if you press most band directors that have competitive programs, they would say, yeah, I want my kids to get the internal, value of this. But do our actions speak that with our students? To give one at the tertiary level that I know Tom Rogalski in the book has been, and in other places, been very critical of. Yeah, we want to expand the circle of goods for people that want to go in and into our profession. But for example, how do our university standards of admittance mitigate against that desire for more inclusivity with sort of the professional standards that we already have expected for students to have? So I think it's something for us to work through. And I think my view of it is, like most band directors I talk to are really trying to work through these things in good faith. But I think it's just always something to be cautious of.
So can I jump in and sort of tie into a little bit of that? One of the things that I gleaned, at least on the fringes from these two chapters, there was a suggestion that, hey, like what we're doing in the band classroom does not directly apply to any immediate professional need, right? Like we don't have this just avalanche of professional wind bands that we're feeding these students into, and we're preparing them for a career in that. And certainly there are things that are analogous to it or adjacent to it where where they're learning the musical skills that help prepare them for those sorts of careers. But it's not like it's a direct pipeline. This is not a specifically like vocational trade that we're teaching when we teach band. And so if you take that off the table, the notion that we're immediately preparing students for a direct comparison point of entry into a professional world, then what then becomes your prevailing mentality? What's the most important thing in terms of teaching? I'll say for me that trying to think of how to distill it down most simply while we're talking here, I want to create students who are global citizens who have an appreciation and understanding of the arts and an understanding of what their relevance is to our society. If we stop teaching the arts, they will stop becoming important. They will stop having relevance. As long as we teach them, they maintain a value. In the same way, if we stop teaching science, science would become less important to our broader society. So that we value the arts now is why we teach them. And going back to something that Travis had mentioned earlier, talking about the sort of side benefit elements of music that often get talked about every year. And I think I want to say it's usually sometime around February, because that would be the time for it. I see infographics shared on social media that compute the SAT scores of students who are part of the Texas Music Educators Association all-state ensembles. And it frustrates me every year because it's a data set that is largely correlative and has no causation value in it, which says that, hey, if you make Texas All-State Band, you're probably doing better on your SAT scores and getting into better colleges. But there's nothing in there that computes, hey, how does being an all-state musician correspond to the level of access to high quality resources, to financial resources, to being in districts that are more supported, that have more teachers involved with them, that pay their teachers more. And the danger on the back end of that is that if you view one as being the result of the other, then when you go to these school programs where the SAT scores, the ACT scores aren't higher, where the standardized test scores aren't higher, then do they say, well, the music teachers are ineffective. They're not teaching our students the right things because we're not seeing this big bump in college admissions as a basis of it. So that's one of those things that always gets me going once a year when I see those things shared on social media channels.
I mean, I spoke at TMEA, and I spoke a little bit about this. I mean, again, anything that works, I'm for. And different things are going to work with different audiences. There are certain audiences those audiences might be 8th graders trying to decide whether or not to stay in 9th grade, or the audience might be a school board or a superintendent. I mean, I'm for anything that works. But to Jake's point, and to kind of the larger point of relevance that we need to really be aware of and try to do better. Chances are the students in band are of a higher socioeconomic background than the students who aren't. And I spent a couple of pages in my chapter sort of giving examples of how excellence, which we like to think, both in repertoire, Aaron, and in performance, we like to think of excellence as being this pure, divorced from any demographics. It's just good or it's not. You can play well or you can't. And we really want very badly to think it's pure meritocracy, and the better musicians and the harder workers do better. But if you have an enormous natural talent and you go home and you can't practice without waking up the neighbors, that's going to be a disadvantage to you. If you don't have parents, grandparents, other family members coming to your concert, taking you out to the Olive Garden afterwards and telling you how proud they are of you, that's going to affect how that experience feels to you. Private lessons, summer camps. I mean, the number of things, in essence, the same things that lead to good SAT scores are the things that make it easier to achieve and to develop real excellence in performance. And again, I want to make clear that that is excellence. I mean, the person who can play more notes on the trumpet better in tune, that's an actual thing.
Right.
But we have to, if we want to make it available to more people, I think I wrote this in the book, if we believe this is a valuable, meaningful life experience, and we want to make it available to more people, well, then we got to figure out ways to get more people into the door, especially the ones who don't have the financial resources and the family resources to do that.
You know, and on that note, Travis, you followed that by saying that the more we can, it's cyclical in a way, because the more diversity that we can get within our band programs, the more diversity we're going to see in our profession. The more we empower women in our band programs, young women, the more women we're going to see on the podium and stuff like that. And you know, it sheds a light on our responsibility as band directors to make sure that we are empowering every single student, and not the students that look like me, you know, that we are being truly equitable to every student and making sure that they see themselves in that role.
And I want to be very clear that I don't have all the answers. I don't have the solutions. These are generational problems. These are just like any of the social issues that ail us as a country. These are things that go back 500 years,
Right.
In many cases. And I mean, I'd like to start by throwing money at it.
Right.
I think that's a good place to start. In the richest country in the history of the world, let's start by throwing money at it. But I don't have easy answers. I don't pretend to have easy answers. But I think the questions are worth asking. I hope the one thing we're doing now, as opposed to 5 years ago, is spending more time being aware of those issues, acknowledging those issues, and getting closer. Getting incrementally closer will make it incrementally better for a number of students, and it's not going to be perfect, but if it's better than it was, that's progress, and that's really all we have available to us, is to try to
Right.
make it better.
So for the panel, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges hindering or preventing the relevance of wind band in our communities and in our schools and stuff?
I hate to say it, but I think Travis was hitting on it. It does come down to money. I taught for 28 years in a school district that I think it's second to Wake County, if I have that right, in North Carolina. With over 100, I think we're over 171,000 students at this point in the school district. And I had 3 very different middle schools in my career in the same district. But about a year ago, I found out that the band director who was chosen as the school district's teacher of the year, which means out of 9,000 teachers, she's a middle school band director, and she should have the same access to things that her students need for her program. But what she does is teach private lessons, and she takes her private lesson money to buy instruments to have for her band program. Wow. And I don't think people understand how often that's happening with directors who were in Title I schools. And until we look at how do we make this equitable, I think it's going to continue to be a problem.
I'd love to approach something that's not economic, not directly economic, although certainly I think I agree with Ruth and Travis that that's a major barrier for a lot of places. I want to go back to something that Travis was talking about earlier, which is that, when you have a host of options, when you're talking about places that have culture, and you have 100, 200 people at a band concert because there are a wealth of options available to them. You're seeing an element of that idea of relevance, which is that, hey, given the options that were on the table, fewer people came to this than to other things. So what I would say is to do self-assessment. Take a look at your attendance at events that are related to what it is that you're doing, and ask yourself, number one, are you reaching the largest number of people that you can realistically expect to reach? And number two, are those people who are coming to your events getting something meaningful out of the experience? I think a lot of times, and I talk about this in my chapter, a lot of times in the wind band world in particular, we have this chip on our shoulder, this sort of big brother comparison to professional orchestras, and this idea that what we do has to be the mimicking, the emulation of that model in terms of our musical presentation. And it almost doesn't matter, no matter where you are. If you're in the area of a professional symphony orchestra, guess what? That orchestra is probably more technically proficient and is probably doing more artistic, what generally people would consider as artistically viable musical presentations than you, because we're in an educational world and they're in a professional world. There's a difference in the expectation and the stratus on that. So what I would say is, mix things up. Like, see if you can find ways to reach new audiences. See if you can find ways to move audiences in different ways, because that kind of thing will create a bond with community that creates that relevance, that sensation of relevance within your own sphere. Building those connections with your community is how you establish that kind of relevance.
I think that's important. You touched on a couple of things. When we start looking at the financial aspect, people put money where they feel that things are important to them. So if we're not, it becomes important for us as band directors to build that relationship with our community, so the community perceives what we do as being important, to find the funds to finance the band and stuff like that. And I know that's, like what you said, Travis, is it's just kind of a general statement applied to a specific problem. But Jake, I think you really touched on something there, that we've got to reach out to more audiences. And it goes back to the topic of repertoire too. I would love to teach my audiences about the value of these great wind band pieces, but they've got to be in the seats before I can teach them something like that. So,
well, if I could jump in sort of on what that is and what Jake was saying too, in addition to involving your community to stay relevant, I'd say, especially if you're new in your position or you're a younger teacher, talk to your kids, talk to the kids that are there, that are in that band and chose to be in that class, and say, what's important to you guys? It's our job as the teachers to introduce them to this literature, but there are kids in that classroom. There may not be the whole class, kids that are out there that are going down that rabbit hole and are finding those pieces, either the old repertoire war horses or some new stuff that maybe we haven't heard yet. And that sometimes is the coolest thing. Well, all of kids email me ideas. Hey, can we play this in jazz ensemble? Or, I had 3 years of kids asking to play Macbeth of Sailors in Wales. And when we programmed it, it was like generational. I had kids coming back to see the concert because they were excited about the next group to play it. So making the programming choices educationally sound, but also relevant to the kids so that they are engaged in that activity, I think is super critical.
I
so
think
Bill, I want to kind of expand on that a little bit, because Bill, you when we were talking before, this kind of relates to one of the topics that you were hoping that we would have gotten into last week with democratic citizenship, and that's just to something that's kind of on your heart lately, and focusing some of your research and stuff like that. But the topics of the authoritarian band director, and then the opposite of that with the student-centered versus teacher-centered learning.
Yeah, and I think Josh's example is a great one of being open to listening to the students to find out what they feel is valuable, and not just make all the decisions when we were looking at the democratic citizenship chapters, the point that I was hoping to get to is we had two very different concepts in those two chapters. One of them was very much with Woodford's chapter, very much student-centered, very progressive. And then Charles Peltz's was much more traditional, where the authority is really vested in the teacher. And a lot of times we try to situate, when we're talking about where's our pedagogical authority in the classroom, we try to situate it at one extreme or the other, right? Either a very student-centered model or very teacher-centered model. First of all, we can notice that those two things are in tension with each other, all right? And most of us live on a continuum, but that doesn't mean that there are not other options. And just really briefly, one that I've been exploring lately is that the authority is not one place or the other, but within the continuum of music as a human practice. In other words, the authority is in the practice of music making itself. If anyone's ever read Parker Palmer's The Courage to Teach, he talks about teaching coming around as a shared love of great things. And I think that's a lot of what happens with music. So if we're talking about relevance, because this really, like even pedagogical authority relates back to relevance. If we're talking about is what we're doing relevance, are we bringing students into contact where they can fall in love with something that's not me, it's not them, it's something outside of ourselves, but it's something that we participate in and negotiate on a continuum. And I think that is a really, really powerful place to situate the pedagogical authority. It's not all one, it's not all the other, but it is something that we're hoping to induct students into a practice with us, a shared practice of music making, where there is going to be some give or take. And obviously, like in a public school classroom, the teacher has to make sure that the students are doing certain things, but you also don't want to shut them down either. So it's just something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I think that does relate back to the relevance question a little bit.
Yeah, most definitely. And Jake, in our private chat, it's not up on the screen, but you actually pointed out that in Cynthia Johnson Turner's essay, she does a really good job of giving some practical ideas and stuff about along those lines about kind of releasing the reins of the band.
And the thing I really love about her essay is that you can see in both her essay and her response that it's not just an automatic thing, that she struggles with it, that she is evaluating that and trying to find what that balance is. And I appreciate that level of vulnerability in her writing to say, like, I'm not sure what I'm doing is exactly right, but I'm trying to do something different because I know what I was brought up in is not what I want to be doing.
That's something that stood out with both of the contributors in that chapter, because Randall also in his essay talked about his article where he felt like he got it totally or didn't convey the message in a way that he thought was effective, and he apologized for it and stuff. So, and Travis, even tonight, you've been very humble and I think humility is a part of, being effective as an educator and having that notion that I don't have all the answers. Yes, I'm very well trained. Yes, I'm good at waving a stick, but I don't have all the answers.
Well, I think we don't have all the answers, and there is no one answer.
Right.
And that's I think really important. I mean, I have opinions, but I am not an absolutist when it comes to almost anything. You could put a piece of music in front of me, and I could say, yeah, that's garbage. I think there's some music. But for me, it's a very small amount of music that I would call garbage. I think there's some music that might not be of the highest artistic merit for this circumstance, but in this circumstance, with this time frame and these students and this set of people, might be exactly the right thing that those students need. And I just think it's really important for us, whether we're talking about how to conduct or whether we're talking about a specific gesture, or whether we're talking about how to program for an ensemble, or whether we're talking about how much student involvement versus faculty leadership to have in an ensemble. It's not just that we don't know, it's that it is unknowable in a universal sense. It is different for every circumstance. And what I think is universal is absolute is we've got to be mindful and thoughtful and creative and analytical about it, and find what's best for our students, for the music we're trying to create, for the audiences we serve, in the time in which we do it. It's all relational. It's all transactional. The immutable value is the acceptance of the fact that it is ever changing.
Yeah. Well, and Bill, I think your goal in writing this book has been achieved because we've had some really great conversations, not just tonight, but in the past 3 weeks. And hopefully it's sparking conversations across the U.S. and throughout the entire band world to really address some of these topics that you brought up. So I want to thank you for taking the time to reach out to these wonderful contributors that have written essays and starting that conversation for all of us.
Well, and it wouldn't have happened if they had not agreed to do it. So I appreciate them very, very deeply. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And Jake, thank you so much for coming back on and joining us. Really appreciate it. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading your essay as well, and the conversations that we've had over the past couple of weeks.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And Travis, thank you so much. Really appreciate your essay. Really spoke a lot to me, and I just really valued a lot that was in it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Josh, Ruth, and Chris, really appreciate you guys being here contributing. Josh, especially, I thank you for all the behind the scenes stuff. And that kind of brings us to the end of tonight's show. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening and watching. And if you have questions on this, feel free to share them in the comments. Get the conversation going on Facebook and on YouTube. Have that dialogue. Start that dialogue. Open up to some of the other band directors. Read the book. Read the book and do your own book club and talk about and wrestle with some of the concepts. Because one of the key themes going through all of these essays is that wind bands should be relevant to your community. So, I mean, to have these conversations is important on a national level to have these conversations, but it's also important on a local level for you to really dig in and talk about what we're doing as a profession. I want to thank everybody and look forward to seeing you guys again.